Welcome, everyone. Today I have a very different episode. It's one I never thought I'd do. One reason for this is that our guest today is a break outside of the horror genre that we always talk about, and it ventures into science fiction. The second aspect is the Christian element in our guest's book. Now, I'm all about growing, though, and sometimes something about this book and the author himself pushed me to go along and do the episode. I felt compelled to explore the book, a science fiction book about Catholic aliens visiting Earth along with its author. So, what I found while reading Pilgrims was a fascinating examination of religion, its significance in human life, and how it can be misused for evil, for a lack of a better term. So, joining me today is M.R. Leonard, author of Pilgrims. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thanks for having me, Jason. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, one thing before we get into, I just want to do a little icebreaker here because before I hit the record button, we were talking about having young kids, and I remember when I had a young kid, when my son was newborn up to like even age of 5 or whatnot. I really struggled finding time to write. So how do you find, you have 2 little ones, right?
Yeah, and actually another coming. So
oh my God. How do you find the time? Insane. And more importantly, badly. How do you find the energy?
The verb find implies that it has been happening as opposed to an aspirational hope that it happens more. It's tough. I wrote this book mostly before my first son was born. So that helped. Getting in the rhythm now that I have kids is definitely a process. And I'm still kind of finding my feet there. So I don't have any good hacks. I know Christopher Rocchia, who blurbed the book, he says he gets up at 4 a.m. That's the time. That's the time of day he can find a big chunk of time to actually get it done. I haven't resorted to that, but I'm trying a lot of things at the moment. So
it might come.
If you had asked me that 3 years ago before my first was born, I'd have this really thoughtful, oh, this is my routine, this is how I get it done. But that's all fallen by the wayside.
I imagine it's chaos, but you get it when you can, right?
Yeah, I do have windows. It's just they go in spurts of being pretty regularized till something comes up. So if for example, like between 10 and 2 during the day ends up being like a really good window, that'll work for like a week until there's some sort of exigency or emergency that just upends that what I thought I was building a routine. Because you kind of like build the routine, you start it going, and you're like, all right, this has some momentum, and then the momentum gets stopped suddenly. So no, I don't have any good answers or good solutions to that question. It's an ongoing challenge.
Routine is very important, I find. I also find that, do you have like a writing time? Because for me, my brain turns to mush sometime around noon, and if I go to write anytime after noon, it's like pulling teeth. But anytime before noon, I'm good to go. How about you?
I'd say 10 to 4 is probably the best time for me. The problem with that is so much, again, if you just had a clean, uninterrupted 10 to 4, that would be the ideal for me. I've tried morning. I've tried night. I thought like my 20-year-old self, imagining myself as a writer later in life, would have thought I'd be doing a lot of writing after 7 p.m. By 7 p.m., it's not happening. Maybe it would have when I was in my 20s, but it's not now.
Yeah, so, I know people who like, I just love writing when everyone goes to bed and the house is quiet. It's like, okay, I get that. The house is nice and quiet. It's peaceful. But I can't think. I can't focus on anything like writing at that time.
Same here. Yeah, the brain is just not ready to rev at that hour. So as much as I like the romantic vision, and I know authors who do this of like, burning the midnight oil and just getting pages and pages. If I can't do it. I've tried it, and it just, the output is so terrible that it's not even worth it.
That's very true. So as mentioned, this is a little bit outside the Weird Reads birdcage, so to speak, as your book Pilgrims is not horror. It's science fiction, and it's also science fiction with a strong Catholic bend to it. Personally, I'm not a Christian, but I found something interesting in our correspondence while we were trying to organize this. You mentioned that you like to talk with non-Christians about pilgrims.
I'd say the vast majority of my readers are non-religious, specifically non-Christian. Because I wrote this book, I'd say I had multiple motivations, but primarily as a science fiction fan, someone who's just loved the genre and just felt like there were these massive holes or stories that weren't being told for, I think, what are essentially arbitrary reasons. And I think going forward, you're gonna feel more writers who feel less encumbered by the historical contingent ways of approaching stories. They'll be unbounded by, I think, some of the conventions that have not plagued the genre, but been a part of the genre for the last 50, 75 years. And I think we can tell more interesting stories. And as a reader of science fiction, I just, they say, write the book that you wish you could read. And this was it for me. I just was wondering, like, when you add religious components to a social situation and talk about it seriously and not dismissively, you can actually come up with some really really interesting drama that keeps you hooked to the page.
For sure. And once again, I want to apologize for my round of questioning you when you first approached me in the planning stages here. I'm not against religion, the religion itself, but I can be against their organizers and leaders. So I needed to confirm in my roundabout way that you're not like, a Trump supporter. So many people, I feel, are dragging what could be a beautiful religion through the mud with misinformation regarding Christianity and what Jesus actually stood for.
Is there a question there?
No, that's the statement, and I just want to know if you want to say anything to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for everyone to dialogue. Dialogos. It's the approaching truth through the act of discussing with others. And I think there's a variety of different perspectives out there. I mean, I would describe myself as raised Catholic, and then I fell away from it. So I probably became a agnostic, if not a full-blown atheist. And I'm what's often described as a revert. So in my mid-30s, I returned to Catholicism, and it was a very intellectual return. That's kind of what brought me back, not exclusively, but that was the sticking point for me. Actually, I was at MIT when I reverted to Catholicism, which is kind of not what most people get to MIT to do, but that happened to me. So, I mean, I would subscribe to the views of the Catholic Church. I'm not in schism with any of them, but that doesn't mean that there isn't productive conversation that can be had with people who've all different ideas and backgrounds. I think this idea that, like, if people think differently from you, you have to be, inimical and yelling at them. Like, I don't think that's how most people are, and I don't think that's consistent with Christianity. Actually. So, I like to talk to everyone. And like I said to you, anything's fair game, Jason, like wherever you want to go with this, whatever. But I hope that I did want to convey to you in advance that I don't think you have to be Christian at all to enjoy Pilgrims and like the story. I mean, it's clearly coming from a point of view. I don't deny that a little, but I think there's something there for everyone.
Yeah. And you know what? We're going to get into that a little bit, but that was the hardest part of this conversation. Now we're just going to go and gush about Pilgrim, so at least in a minute.
Yeah. I like how this is very meta, because this is a weird read for weird reads.
Yeah.
Right? This is not within the wheelhouse of what you typically talk about. So this
very much so. Yeah. It is weird for weird reads. Yes. In our discussion, you just mentioned it too, that you were raised Catholic and became an atheist and then converted back to Catholicism in your 30s. Can you tell us what involved that journey? Because that's pretty, I guess it's not severe, but it's kind of going for, I'm a agnostic myself, so I understand where that comes from. But how do you go from being Catholic to maybe atheist leaning, agnostic to going back to being a Catholic?
I think Well, I'm trying to think of it succinctly, but here's the general gist of it. So I was raised in a family, we went to church on Sunday. I had a great experience with that. I mean, there was no particular traumatic. It was a nice, comfortable thing to do as a family. You do that as a child, you become a teenager. Some people, that's like 13 is where a lot of people start, bucking up against sort of things. Like I remember, like, they just don't. Sometimes it's as simple as you just don't want to go to church on Sunday. I want to be at the house and watch cartoons, or I don't know, whatever you did back at that time. And that wasn't me so much as I probably would have eye rolled every time we had to, come on, let's go to church. And I continued going dutifully as a high schooler. Then I got to college. I actually went to a Catholic college here in Boston called Boston College. Mm-hmm. So like on the weekends, so this is the other exit ramp for all the kids who were raised Catholic for a typical one. They went with their family. Now they're in college and no one's like there pulling them to go on a Sunday. So they just stop. But I didn't, because they kind of made it pretty convenient at Boston College. It was like a mass, like every few hours on the weekends. So it was, you could really be that lazy college student who rolls out in sweatpants, like, and 5 minutes away. And I think that was I was coasting at that point. But once I left college and neither of those facts obtained, I basically just stopped going. And then a lot came with it. So one of the things that bothered me, I think, since I was young, going through the motions up through college, was I always felt that religion, in particular Christianity, was very intellectually shallow. Mm-hmm. Like it was, and I've come to disagree with that now, but that's just kind of my attitude at the time. And I think that was very much the 90s, early aughts kind of. The religion wasn't, at least in Catholic circles, or more particularly mine, it wasn't talked about in a sophisticated way. It was kind of like, this is a building where we all go be nice to one another. And, I think nice people would agree, you don't need to go to a building every week to be nice to other people. Mm-hmm. And I think if that's all the religion is, then it's really a waste of everyone's time. And I personally did not want to investigate it further, because I felt discouraged from doing so. But I was also I didn't know what I wanted. I was almost afraid of what I'd find out. So that's kind of, in my 20s, I pretty much was no religion and leaned toward agnosticism and atheism. I kind of embraced that as, this is what smart people seem to hold as their worldview. Ergo, I should emulate them. Mm-hmm. Either because I have pretensions of being smart, or just because it's, even if I'm not smart, that seems smarter to emulate smart people as opposed to not smart people. Yeah. As I grew up, though, I saw a lot of kind of holes in that worldview, and I began doing some more digging. And I think this is just one of the many beautiful things about the internet. Like, you can actually seriously engage with some of these big questions a lot easier than you could in the 1990s or early 2000s. And as I started kind of inquiring as to some of the questions, like the objectivity of moral facts or things, I had my own positions on this. I did take philosophy in college, so I wasn't completely new to this domain. But as I started looking into it more, I felt increasingly like, oh, okay, I don't think this is an unsophisticated worldview. In fact, I'm getting quite impressed with the sophisticated nature of it. And this was probably one of my chief roadblocks to becoming an adherent of any religion, let alone Catholicism. That, combined with meeting my wife and just getting in a healthy, loving relationship. Well, my girlfriend, who became my wife, that opened a whole other set of doors about like what sort of person I want to be, what sort of aspects of myself I want to champion. So you kind of remove the roadblock and open up love, which in the Catholic worldview, God is love. And so, these things combined, I think, were pretty much the cause of my reversion. If I had to summarize it, was that okay, Jason? Was that?
No, that's
double
perfect,
click wherever you like, but that's more or less the high level.
I was just curious about the journey. When I was younger, I went through a religious phase, I call it, and I joined a church. And then pretty soon after, I left it, and then I never went back. That's my story.
When you say young is all relative. I
was 18, 19, around that age. I was just searching to see what was. I was more like more than likely searching myself to see what I believed and testing myself. And when I went to church, I just didn't find anything there for me. So that's just my story.
Yeah.
But
It's different for everyone. Yeah. But I think what's really cool, like if in 19, I was having this discussion on another, actually with Jeff Hayes and one of we actually put it online, but
Mhm,
it felt like in the late 90s, like questioning things like, did Jesus exist? Would have
mhm,
been like, I suppose if I actually did it, I probably would have gotten a better answer, but it felt like that was a question you couldn't even ask.
mhm.
And the great thing about the internet and this kind of proliferation of content that's outside is um, you can ask these questions. And to my surprise, I got much better answers than I expected. So that's the cool thing about nowadays. Like we can all explore so much intellectually, philosophically, religiously, spiritually. Then, I mean, you and I are old enough to remember when access to this much information was just
Yeah, not
so
there.
onerous and impossible.
Yeah. Um, Actually, when I said that I didn't find anything in the church that was for me, it was more just the building and maybe the people who went there. But I did find stuff because I read the Bible a lot during those days. I used to read like 15 minutes every night before I went to bed from the
That's
New
great.
Testament. But what I found in Christianity that I agree with was Jesus's teachings. Is basically teaching about helping those who are less fortunate than you and just being a good person. Basically, is what the very basics of what it comes down to, or what it comes down to. And I've always held on to that. That aspect is very important to me. I think it's a good guidebook and how we could treat one another. And that was part of the reason why I was grilling you when you first contacted me. I was like, "Oh, you're Christian, okay?" And then I, shot off some questions at you, and but yeah,
What do you think? What sort of things, if I had said, would you have said, all right, this is not like, or was there some impression that, um, or like typecasting character when you get this email? Are you kind of like, oh, it's one of these people?
well,
I
there
don't know. Like,
was first of all, it was the first time a Christian, like somebody blatantly Christian, reached out to want to be on the show. Like they're writing about Christianity and they want to be on the show, and so I didn't know how to react to that because there's so many people who, as I mentioned before, who are treating Christianity as though it's their own way of maybe controlling others. You know what I mean? Instead of just spreading kindness and love. Uh, and so I just wanted to make sure that you were on the side of humanity and believing in kindness and taking care of one another, no matter who they are. And that's what's important to me. So if you came across as somewhat hateful, I wouldn't have scheduled the interview. I'm totally open to discussing religion, but I'm not interested in a discord of hatred, if that makes any sense.
yeah, and I think Christianity in particular, um, it's it's definitely, unfortunately, earned might not be the right verb, but there's no doubt that people have used religion as a mechanism of just social control.
Hmm.
And not like, not as incidental to like, if you're engaging in building a world consistent with the values inside Christianity or the Bible, that you will end up making some rules that have social consequences. Like that's one aspect, but there is undoubtedly naked coercion and social control across the history of Christianity, people using it
Yeah,
as an instrument, which is obviously completely at odds with the religion itself, but it's happened. And
yeah.
that's the world we actually inhabit. And so I can totally understand. I think we're in an interesting time where Christianity has kind of receded a little in the Western world.
Hmm.
Or at least it has, in terms of its ability to enact social control. So it's interesting. I mean, that might be debated. We could quibble with it. Some people, say we're a post-religious society. But the reality is, the genuine Christians you meet are not excited about using it in that sense. But that doesn't mean
Yeah,
every Christian's a genuine Christian. So
yeah.
you know,
That's very
it's
true.
fair
And
for you to ask.
it's not only Christianity where that people
That's right.
use. It's almost every religion. That's what's out there, including the most peaceful ones you can imagine. Well, Christianity, like I said, if you read the New Testament, Christianity should be one of the most peaceful religions out there, right? But so I'm kind of saying that there's other ones that are more peaceful than Christianity, when that's not necessarily true. But I think there is a general, uh, you know, outlook on Christianity from people who aren't Christian as people being not very nice as Christians, except for the fact that a lot of us know Christians who are like, they'll give you the shirt off their back.
And that was how it spread initially. I mean, in ancient Rome, there's this religion that has all sorts of social costs associated with it. It's completely absurd for most people to even comprehend. You're saying you worship a guy who was killed like a slave? Like, really? Like, that's like the worst example of what I could even conceptualize as a god. But what was really compelling was just the way Christians act in a pagan world, and it really got people's attention. Tom Holland really just discusses this he's a great classicist, but he wrote a book called Dominion, and it's essentially how Christianity took over the Roman Empire. It impacts many of the things that we think of in the world today, which is great. So I'm going to plug someone else's book, Tom Holland's Dominion. It's very popular. Yeah, he's actually a co-host of a famous podcast called The Rest is History. So he's a very popular, a lot of smart people like to cite him, but it's a pretty landmark book. Not to plug it too much, but like, for example, he essentially goes in, why in Western society do we hold values that historically speaking and outside the West are kind of not that common? For example, even like the concept that racism is bad. The Romans would not have thought racism is bad. They would they wouldn't even know what you were talking about. Of course, a Roman is superior to everyone else than they encounter. And so where do we, like, what happens? Because if we're the descendants of ancient Rome, like, what happened that we can reach a point where such things, he actually starts the prologue talking about how Harvey Weinstein would have, like, there's no way he could be canceled inside Roman society. That would have been just the normal behavior of a Roman aristocrat. So what happens in our society that we can do that? Anyways, enough about Tom Holland, but I just thought it's really eye-opening for people who are into Western history. Like, it's kind of an interesting perspective on things.
Yeah, it's also interesting how we evolve in our thinking as a populace. Which has always been fascinating to me. So I find it interesting, though, that you science and religion don't often mix. In fact, they usually say if you don't ever bring up politics, science, or religion in any conversation, if you want to keep the conversation peaceful. There's a saying around there that says that, right? But you've mixed religion and science fiction, at least this, but you do use a lot of science in Pilgrims. So before we get into Pilgrims, I just want to know, is Catholic science fiction what you feel like you're going to continue to write?
Yeah, I think me and other sci-fi writers, some of whom are Catholic, some of whom aren't, we love to have this debate about, did I write, not just about my book, but did I write Catholic sci-fi, or is this just science fiction? A lot of people don't say that, Lord of the Rings is Catholic fantasy, even though it is, J.R.R. Tolkien was a militant Catholic, and the whole work is deeply Catholic in every part of it. In fact, he even wrote in one of his letters, he thought, this is such a Catholic work, I don't think there'll be any readership for it. It's going to be very niche. Well, that didn't turn out that well, no. That prediction at least. So interesting. That modifier is something that I kind of chafe against, even though, like, I'm okay being called it. I think this is science fiction. What science fiction has gotten wrong for a while is there has been, and honestly, it comes from the 19th century, this idea that science is at odds with religion. One talks about, the natural world, and one talks about the supernatural. They're definitionally different. They're not really, like, science can't disprove metaphysical claims, all that sort of stuff. And I think a lot of the scientists now are opening up to the idea that the project of science is in no way contrary to religious worldviews, in the Christian one in particular. In fact, there's kind of a lot more overlap. A lot of physicists are converting to Christianity. It's a whole other saga that other people have discussed more. But this is what I grew up in the 20th century. You're either, Rick and science, with the capital, or not even a capital S, just Rick, like from Rick and Morty, is just like science, even though he's basically a sorcerer, and there's no meaning deeper in the world. And you either believe in science and like Star Trek, or you're one of those backwards religious people who believes in, magic wands and fairy tales. And I just think that dichotomy was probably wearing thin at the end of the 20th century. But as we round our way a quarter of the way through the 21st, like that just doesn't hold water. And so what I was really hoping to do with my book was, listen, religion has had a huge impact on societies. In science fiction, what we do is we imagine a possible world. We imagine a possible world, and we try to make it somewhat relatable so that our imaginings can be followed by the reader. They can look at the premises we took and see how we arrive at the world that we built. And so in other words, you're being graded at how well you create the premises you use to create this other world. I'll give you a bold prediction. All science fiction authors are closeted or, amateur futurists. Mm-hmm. In the year 4000 AD, so another 2000 years hence, or CE, if you really insist on that, religion will still be there as long as humans exist. In fact, I would say the three Abrahamic religions will still be in existence. Judaism is been around for what, like 5,000 years, let's call it. That's a lot of Lindy effect, to use that term. I mean, the odds are that we'll be here for another 5,000 as long as humanity's still existing. Yeah. Weirdly, you could read a lot of science fiction and not realize that. I mean, that is just basic futurism. Just like you can say that as a purely clinical, non-invested party. And so the way it was kind of written out of the stories, I felt was anti-scientific. It was like, it was almost like this arbitrary, like, putting the thumbs on the scale of an experiment because you demand a certain result, meaning we're going to write futures. There's no religion in them. Well, I mean, that doesn't mean we don't have to agree with the religion, but it'll probably be there. Well, you can write cargo cult superficial religion or no religion at all. We just want science and technology. And that's not an interesting depiction of the human condition. So yeah, I do marry these all together. Will I continue to write Catholic science fiction? I, as a writer, will not be bound by these artificial barriers that say you can't address metaphysical things inside science-related, high-concept, premise, speculative fiction. I think that has handicapped too many writers for too long, and there's too many interesting stories to tell with that in mind. So, we'll keep it going.
Well, I have this theory that we don't know everything yet. Like, we have this, the great void, the great beyond. We're only here for a short time. We don't know exactly, scientifically, what happens to us when we die. And until we do have scientific proof of what happens, there's always going to be spirituality, I think.
Yeah. I mean, there's a whole mountain of unanswered questions that I don't think science in principle can answer. Like, for example, a lot of people like to talk about the multiverse, right? And so, again, I reverted at MIT. I mean, I met some of these people who were at the boundaries of scientific knowledge. That was really cool, actually. And there's no experiment you can run to really prove the multiverse. It's what is appropriately called a metaphysical speculation. Yeah. So whether you believe we're all here because there's at the origin of things, before we can touch it in the natural world, there's this process that generates universe. We're not going to examine what that process is because we might have just pushed the God question back, or you think there's a creator of the universe. Those are both metaphysical speculations. And I think one of the metaphysical speculations is, what is mind? Is it material? If it's not, frankly, I think that it's looking like it's not based on the science. What happens to it? Because we know matter changes, and although matter and energy don't actually get destroyed, they just convert to one another. But with regard to mind, if it's not a material thing, we don't know how it comes into existence or whether it goes out of existence. So I just don't think science is ever going to give us an answer to that question. I
They're
think there's a
not.
lot of
No.
questions science won't give us an answer to. So
Maybe if
yes,
we're
religion will continue to be around as long as these big questions remain
yeah.
unanswered. I think you're 100% right.
I say maybe if we're still around as a human race or as a race, as a creature, a million years from now, maybe it'll be answered. But we're nowhere near it now. Nobody's even really asking the right questions, scientifically, of course. So that's always something that's fascinated me, and I like that you brought up the multiverse theory, or at least the metaphysical. I think I'm using the right term there. It's a very physics thing, right? Of different universes popping. Like I could get up and go to the bathroom, or I could stay here. In one universe, I said, okay, I got to put this on pause because I have to go to the bathroom, and I go to the bathroom. But in reality, in this reality, we stay here talking, right? That sort of split. There is no proof that can happen, and yet they say the math fits. I
Uh,
never understood that kind of thing, but
Well, that I mean, you could just imagine. Listen, I'm going to put on my anti-religious, cynical hat. The priests say there's this place called heaven. I'm just some peasant farmer. I don't really read all that well, and the priest can read. He gets that book. He speaks Latin. I'm just a humble guy farming my fields, and I don't read all these books. And he says this is going to happen, so I'll just kind of go with it. The math doesn't really show that. I mean, it's
mhm,
essentially people fill in the blanks. The math is causally effect is what the technical philosophical term means. Meaning you can do numbers all day. You can take your bank account balance and multiply by 10 all you want, but you don't have 10 times, you don't increase your wealth by an order of magnitude every time you do that. I mean, I
yeah,
wish it was that easy, but it doesn't really work. So sometimes things get the aesthetic of science when they're really like more comparable to philosophical speculation.
yeah,
I would put the multiverse and these alternate realities into that camp. Is it when we go past what the quantum field theory and like we know that the quantum field theory applies. It's very
mhm,
predictive in terms of what happens to matter and all sorts of things. When we go past it, so like if matter's existing in states of probability, it doesn't, and it only kind of comes down to actuality when it's observed by an observer. What does that mean? And so that's where people posit things like in this other universe, you're going to the bathroom at this time. Basically, all of the Marvel cinematic world at this point, and
mhm,
like art Hollywood has really run with this genre because it makes for some fun things, but it's not really science. Like they get off the science train and get into the just speculative train really easily. But because scientists do that, sometimes we confuse the science part versus just their musings. So yeah, and that's one of the interesting things about writing the book. When you write a first contact novel and aliens show up, there's all these expectations that
mhm.
you kind of import but don't necessarily follow from the way the aliens are. And I get to play with that as an author and kind of subvert some expectations and make some pleasant surprises for the readers. So that was kind of the goal, I think. And I think more writers are going to start playing with those things.
I hope so. And that was the term I was looking for, the philosophical quantum physics. But my brain turns to mush after a certain time of day, and
You and me
we're
both,
there
man.
now.
Yep.
We're there now. So, speaking of pilgrims and aliens, and first contact books, can you tell us what Pilgrims is about?
Yeah, Pilgrims is about a washed up Latin teacher who is thrust into the center of humanity's first contact when aliens arrive, land at the Vatican, and ask for an audience with the Pope. So it's kind of flipping on its head that classic trope where, the aliens land on the White House lawn and say, take me to their leader. Instead, they land at the Vatican and ask for the audience with the Pope, which no one in this world is expecting. It's essentially set in a near future, vague about the time, but
Mhm.
more or less a world like ours. And before the novel starts, it starts a few days before the aliens actually arrive on Earth. But humanity detected the aliens coming 5 years prior.
Mhm.
And so they saw aliens are coming to Earth. They tried to communicate with them. They didn't hear anything back. So the world has just been on tenterhooks, wondering if this approaching alien ship is friend or foe. And when it finally does get here, and this happens at about the 25% mark of the book, but it's on the back matter, so this isn't really a spoiler. They basically pop the hatch and ask for an audience with the Pope, which my protagonist and no one was expecting. So that's kind of the setup for the novel, and we get to see what the world looks like as aliens are arriving, and then we get to see after they make this announcement that, are they lying? Are they faking? Do they have some sort of agenda? What do they want now that they're here and purporting to be Catholic? Like, well, maybe everything will be perfect. Maybe we can just end the novel. Like, there you go. Happily ever after. The aliens are Catholic. End of the book. As a writer, I didn't take that direction, as you know. 75% happens after that point. A lot of stuff happens.
I was reading some of the reviews after reading this book, and there are some people who reviewed it as though that's what happened, purporting this book as like just simply Christian fiction. But it's so much more than just Christian fiction, because you're pummeling the reader with questions throughout the entire. You're asked to question what's going on every step of the way.
Yeah, and I think that's how I wanted to write it, because the main character Austin. All authors get asked, "Are you just Austin, the main character?"
Mm-hmm.
And when we meet him in the beginning of the book, he's kind of he's got some growing
issues.
Up to, he's got some issues. That's a good way to put it. But honestly, I'm not better than that. I don't know. So just to give some more setup that's revealed very early in the book, he's just a guy pursuing Latin education. I think he wants to be a professor in Latin,
Mm-hmm.
and then the aliens show up, and if whatever amount we need people who speak Latin and know Latin very well in today's world, multiplied by I was going to say multiplied by whatever percentile you think that will be worth after. If that's worth X, like, is it worth 0.1X, 0.01X, 0.001X? The point is, I don't know how lucrative learning Latin is as a career path today, but it's a lot less lucrative when aliens are going to arrive in 5 years. And so he's in a pretty terrible state when we start the novel, and he thinks the world's going to end. No one knows what these aliens are going to do. Some people are not, a lot of people like that about the beginning part, because I'm really tempted to just get straight to the aliens, but I kind of wanted to set up. You have to set up a lot of these things. Yeah. And a lot of people liked this kind of dystopia I wrote, because it's not Mad Max, but it's not like Don't Look Up, because in Don't Look Up, like, everyone's worried, but like the power works and everything's like, it's like normal life with a lot of angst. But so no, it's like somewhere in between. Like, some people, as you can imagine, were panicked for a little bit. They kind of were tired of being panicked and just decide to be deluded and go on with life. Some people are excited. They think this is going to be good. Some people are certain that this is the end of the world, and society's filled with people of all these different perspectives. My protagonist happens to be in the end is nigh camp, but not everyone is, which is why the lights are on, why there's food to be eaten, and why there's some social order, although that's heavily imposed by the state at that point.
And he also decides to kind of get drunk and stay drunk. And he steals a lot of money from his mom. And he
after
inadvertently kills somebody. There's a lot going on with
my developmental editor was also Canadian. And we had a few debates about that, because he's like, he was just there for a robbery when someone got killed. That doesn't make him a murderer. I'm like, well, in America, in the state I live in, and I think all 50 states, it's called felony murder. If in the process of committing a felony, a murder happens, everyone involved is guilty. Mm-hmm. So, like the 3 bank robbers, the legal, I don't know if this applies in Canada, but here, you only planned on pointing a gun at the teller at the bank, you and your 2 compadres, but guy 3 is an extra crazy and he shoots the teller and you run out there. You can't say, well, I only meant to rob the bank. Wasn't going to kill anyone. Mm-hmm. In my state, and I think across most of the United States, everyone is guilty. So so he might have been inadvertent, but he put himself in a position where something like that could happen. So he's still quite culpable for that outcome. And this is all in the first few chapters. So we kind of see that this Austin fella, he's not the best character around. No. But I would also say I don't think I don't think I'm above any of that. I never wrote him with judgment. I mean, if I thought the world was going to end and I had, the worldview that Austin holds, I probably would try to drink myself, silly in a cave. And
There's
maybe I would be like, who cares if you knock over a store? I mean, they're not going to need the money after the world's ending. So what's
Mhm.
so wrong about that sort of thing?
Yeah. But Austin has an interesting arc to his story too. He starts off in a very confused, painful place because everything's going to end, right? And he does these terrible things, but he goes through an arc of redemption. He has a very redemptive arc to his story,
He
and
does.
that's something I really enjoyed about it because um, there's a lot of people out there, and I don't know if you had this conversation with your editor whether or not people were going to like Austin or not, because
We definitely had that conversation.
yeah, I'm sure you did, because he's unlikable at first. It's hard to
Yeah.
get you on his side, but you do end up on his side, and that's there's a lot of people who say that they don't like unlikable characters, but I always say if they're interesting, then that's what keeps me going. And Austin was certainly that character because he has a lot of reasons why he's doing the things he's doing. He's he's interesting, and he pulls you into the story regardless of what he's doing.
Yeah, so I have two thoughts. One, I'll put a pin in the redemption arc thing because I think that I kind of telegraph on the back matter, so I can describe that. But with regard to likability, it's really interesting as a writer, and I this is my debut novel, so I kind of learned a lot of as someone who consumed a lot of science fiction and film and television. I probably knew this stuff intuitively, but until you kind of learn it and someone points it out, you're like, oh, that's why. There's a lot of ways we can build likability with a
Mhm.
character, and it's not always their great actions. There's a famous book called Save the Cat. It's actually
Mhm.
about screenwriting, but it applies for like all writing. And it's like have your protagonist save a cat in the very beginning so that the audience will like them. And
Yeah.
and you'll see this in so many movies. It's even sometimes just gratuitously added. Like there's a children's movie called Moana, and very early on there's like a turtle that can't make it to the water while she's singing one of her songs, and she goes and she helps that turtle get into the ocean. So it's
Hmm.
not there's not even dialogue, but like the Disney writers are like, make sure that save the cat beat is in there. We have to have that. um
Yeah.
and so that's one way to do it, but the other there's other methods, one of which is make us sympathize with the character, so they can be put in a terrible situation where you kind of feel like you yourself would be trapped. And that's kind of the direction I go with Austin. Another category is called competence. Like we love seeing competence, so even like a serial killer like Dexter, we're
Hmm.
sitting there watching him kill someone, but he's doing it so competently. Like some people call that competence porn or whatnot. Some people just
Hmm.
love that. And all audiences respond to it. Some people seek it out. Like they just want an unlimited supply, but we can get characters. That's how you can get some really mean characters. Think like mob movies or like Hitmen.
Yeah.
And they're just so good at what they do. You just can't stop looking at it. So I went the sympathy route because as bad as Austin is, he's in pretty tough straits. Like he's got a lot of kind of crap thrown his way. And there
Hmm.
is one point, it's at chapter 7, when he has a choice to basically stay with his mother or go see a prostitute that he's been like that's been driving the plot for the first 7 chapters. And if I
Yeah.
had made him go see the prostitute as opposed to staying at his mother for what he believes to be the end of the world, I think I just would have lost all the readers at
You
that
might
point.
have. Yeah.
So that was the crux. But there was a lot of debate as if we had already lost them already before chapter 7. So yeah, it was. But I'm glad to see that a lot of readers have stuck around for it.
Yeah.
I can talk about the redemption arc if you want, or go into something else.
Now you can talk about the redemption arc if you want.
Well,
Um,
yeah. So the book is a sci-fi retelling of Augustine's Confessions. Now, Saint Augustine was a saint in around the year 400 AD. So the end of the Roman Empire, but still the Roman Empire. And he wrote a book called The Confessions that literally invented the genre of memoir. Before that time, we didn't. There were biographies of famous people, but they're written in almost like a mythic way by someone else. It almost reads like a story about a god. and some people had letters and correspondence, but there was no like just honest, like pour your heart onto the page. People didn't do that until St. Augustine came along. And so he wrote this book called The Confessions, which is, as it sounds, it's his life story as a long confession to God. And so this became kind of foundational for the Western canon. Now, of course, people still know about it now. And again, he was very important, influential in Christianity, but just in a literary sense, this is a cornerstone of the literary canon of the West. And so a lot of people also know it from that dimension, but fewer people nowadays. Like in Shakespeare's time, they would have known about the different aspects of the Confessions like people know about Romeo and Juliet, even if they've never come close to reading a Shakespeare play or seen one on the stage. You know, they know about, they can see the balcony and go like, oh yeah, that's that Romeo and Juliet thing. You know, the Romeo and Juliet on the balcony. The famous scene from Augustine's Confessions is St. Augustine kind of is really torn up about a bunch of pears him and his teenage kind of like up to no good friends go and smash for no reason. And he really is torn up about these pears for all of his writing, even though as a well-to-do Roman youth, he spent a lot of time in the brothel. You know, there was all sorts of fun stuff. So you can just imagine these students in Shakespeare's time, like turning the pages being like, why can't we hear more about the brothel instead of these stupid pears? Like this is, I'm sick of pears. So I kind of telegraph what the arc is going to be, where we start and where he's probably going to end. But luckily, unfortunately, whatever you want to call it, most of my readers will not be aware enough about the Augustine's Confessions to be like, I see where this is going. And even if you do know where it's going, it's still interesting to watch. But what's been really cool about the book is it's kind of highlighted this famous ancient, like I said, cornerstone of the Western canon. People are going, oh, wait, what's the source material of this? Let me go check it out. I have a lot of people reach out to me that say like they picked it up for the first time. And not all Christian. A lot of people who aren't Christian, they're just like, yeah, I feel like I should read this like I read Moby Dick or something, just so I'm more sophisticated. So yeah, that's the redemption arc. I tried to have a very Augustinian arc, and even Austin's name, Austin DeSantis. Austin is the anglicized version of Augustine, and DeSantis means saint or the sanctified. So it's all there, but not every reader sees it, and that's totally cool. But the Easter eggs are there if you want them.
I've never read that, so I got to go check that out.
It's a little different. Remember, it was written in 400 AD, but there's some great works that discuss like why this was so influential across so much of our art throughout time.
Yeah, interesting. I also wanted to talk. I mentioned this earlier. Before we hit record, I fell in love with the AI, Virgil.
Yeah.
I want to know what went into the creation of Virgil, because he was fun to watch, and his relationship with Austin and Father Ambrose was interesting to see form. How did that come about?
So the name itself is pulled straight out of Dante's Divine Comedy.
Interesting.
Virgil's the poet who wrote the Aeneid, which is kind of like, if you had to, it's fiction. Well, it's kind of like these analogies get harder when you go pre-Christianity or you're not including Judaism. Like the ancient Greeks didn't have a Bible, but the Iliad and the Odyssey almost functioned like a Bible. Like everyone knew it. They had the stories. It was like a foundational mythos for their entire people and their society. The Romans kind of wanted that too, because they kind of looked up to the Greeks. So Virgil penned this book called the Aeneid. I'm sure there's people screaming at the screen who are much more better at explaining ancient history than me, and all the facts I'm getting wrong. But more or less, the Aeneid is this famous thing. And in Dante's Dante, when he wrote the Divine Comedy, he needed what he called virtuous pagan to take Dante through hell and purgatory. And Virgil ends up being his guide, as one of, Virgil being one of Dante's. What was famous about the Aeneid is people say that the Latin and the prose in it is of almost another level of quality. That's why it kind of took this supreme place in the society. So Dante Alighieri has this huge love for Virgil, the author of the Aeneid. And so in my book, Virgil ends up meeting up with Austin and bringing him through the alien ship, which is very reminiscent of the Divine Comedy as you go to different aspects. So that was it. How to make it. Everyone loves Virgil. He's by far the favorite character of the whole book. And you listen to the audio version. He's voiced by a guy named Justin Thomas James, who is just outstanding. He actually did some of the original music for the audio book too. So Justin is just this multi-talented Canadian. He's a Quebecer.
There's another Canadian. Yeah.
There's a lot of Canadian influence in this novel. I got to tell you.
That's good.
You guys are just bringing this art to another sphere. It's awesome. But when I wrote Virgil, so just the conception is that aliens are here. They're purporting to be Catholic. They seem to be Catholic enough to, cross the galaxy to go to the Vatican. There's very outward signs that they're seemingly devout. Again, we don't know if it's a show or what they're up to. So I just thought their AIs, like if you're a society that's, advanced society that's very religious, your robots are going to be religious too. So I wanted to depict a saint. It's like a saint essentially. And so imagine a saintly robot, C-3PO, but like epically saintly.
Yeah.
And I don't mean saintly like Ned Flanders, like not Simpsons, like Oakley Dokley.
No,
we're talking like people who you could be like, wow, like that's an inspiring person.
This is like a pure being. Like they're so innocent in a sense, but they follow the rule book basically to the T. And even when it goes against what its race is doing, it still wants to do what's right. And because I'm kind of skirting around the issue here, because near the end, we know, right? Like, where I'm going here, but Virgil ends up doing what's right. And that's when I knew. I was like, oh my God, I love this guy.
Yeah. Virgil is, I had a copy editor too. So this is different from my Canadian editor. This was just in the parlance, developmental editor kind of helps you with the story. Copy editor, they don't just like edit typos. In fact, it's much more than that. They help make the words flow, the sentences. They might be like, you talked about this here in this chapter. I don't think you need to cover it again in this later chapter. So it's substantive, but it's less like the big story. So I had this copy editor from Brooklyn. Like I was convinced she would just the Catholic, like the sort of individual that, at least on the surface, I imagined would be hostile to Christianity, even something that just went near it. But she really loved the novel. And I have all these notes when we get to Virgil and some of the things he does towards the end. And she's like, Virgil, I love him. Like these are most of the notes are like, you're bad at writing here. You need to fix this. This is the problem. So I was very pleased to get to these notes of, I love him. He's so pure. I just wish I knew someone like him. And that's actually one part about the book that surprised me, because I would say Virgil's arc is probably one of the smallest. Mm-hmm. He's kind of consistently the way he is. And I think people are really thirsty for what are called paragons. Superman's a paragon, meaning they're not really a flawed individual. They kind of have all the pieces put together for the most, but they get in conflicts and they do have to overcome obstacles, but they generally are like more or less just this awe-inspiring personality to look up to the whole time. And we've kind of, in our very postmodern, very kind of ironical end of the 20th century or beginning of the 21st, like we started kind of not seeing as many of those characters in fiction as often. I think people thought it was a little unsophisticated, shallow, and I do think it can be done badly, but when it's done well, I think we all really love to see a good paragon in our fiction. And I think Virgil, I'm honestly surprised, but as I reflect on why people are so into that character, I think that's why. I think it's just different, and I feel like it's earned. It's not just there arbitrarily. Virgil pays a big price for being the way that he is, but he is who he is to his soul, and that makes it way more interesting. But it's also, I just think, from a science fiction point of view, the Catholic aliens are going to make C-3PO super Catholic. So that's not what we're used to expecting when we meet the alien robot. But it's once that's what a lot of people like about my book. It's a lot of the comments are, when I heard it was about Catholic aliens, I thought it was a joke. And then I saw that this guy played it straight the entire time and took it really seriously. And I was into it. So it's
Yeah.
like, once you set the premises, people like to see, like, yeah, I suppose the alien robots also would be pretty religious as well. What's a religious robot look like? That doesn't make any sense. I just got to read more to figure it out.
Yeah. Now, my next question is kind of hard to ask because it really goes into some of the reveals um, through the book, and I really want to escape that. And the reason why is because there's some mind blowing things that happen in this book that I feel you kind of have to go into blind in order to experience, similar to what I experienced while reading it. So, the aliens, they're Catholic. They became so through a fascinating thread that I don't think we should spoil because of what I was just talking about. However, I do think it's essential to acknowledge that the aliens, although they do really try, they are not saintly by any means and fall into similar sins of humanity, what we've been kind of discussing throughout this entire show. And I was wondering if you could maybe discuss a little bit about that. Because
Yeah. So, yeah, go ahead.
well, I was just going to say this kind of contrasts against what those reviewers saying that this is merely Christian fiction. This goes against that. It pushes against that idea. So it's kind of weird to me that people would just sum it up as Christian fiction.
Yeah, I think, I told my story, and I think I got a pretty weak, unsophisticated, superficial Christianity in my upbringing. I think that's, and a lot of people did, and a lot of people in the culture got that, whether they were Christian or not. Ned Flanders is not a bad sort of example of kind of like the id of what the caricature of a Christian is.
Mm-hmm.
Not Thomas Aquinas, who I consider one of the most impressive thinkers in human history. Not, all the people who had sophisticated understandings of their faith and were willing to die for it. Like some of the martyrs during the Holocausts. There were people who gave their life to free Jews who were going to be killed in Auschwitz. There's a famous saint. My wife's family's from Poland. Is a saint there. It's Saint Maximilian Kolbe, and that's his story. I mean, and these aren't dumb people who are just kind of going through things simply like that. So I got a lot of the culture in my background. Like, I'm very sympathetic because that's what I got a lot of. But this idea that Christianity makes everything okily dokily and everything nice, and the fact that you're showing Christians sinning is somehow not consistent with the Christian tradition. You should show them, like, everyone who's Christian should be perfect because Christianity makes people perfect. It's like, no serious people have ever said that. And frankly, the New Testament doesn't show that, and none of the Bible shows that. The Bible is filled with betrayal, lust, people who have literally seen miracles from God, stopping to believe in God. I mean, that's humanity. And if you don't write that, no one is going to buy into this religion. Really, Christianity became a thing because it was a potent, strong, intellectual, solid faith. And I don't know what happened in the various centuries, but by the time I came along, that had kind of left the picture, and we kind of got the Ned Flanders version of Christianity. And, churches is just a place to be nice. And I think a lot of people fell away. I think, and reasonably so, if that's the Christianity that they're getting. But I wanted to show what the real deal. And if you're going to show the real deal, there isn't one Christian, I guess, besides Mary in the Christian tradition, who's not a sinner. So even if we get Catholic aliens, like, you better believe they're flawed. Okay. These aren't actual angels coming down from heaven. These are other creatures. And it's fun. It's fun to play with that expectations, because I think some Catholic readers were probably like surprised to see that. But it's also the readers who are non-religious and are just expecting kind of milk toast. Oh, this is going to be boring. Nothing happens. No, Christians sin. Christians do evil things all the time. Christians scandal, which is what they would be called, the delta between their purported beliefs and what they actually do, is the reason people have not become Christian, deconverted from Christianity, and has been plaguing the faith ever since Peter denied Christ 3 times before the cock crows, which is, for those who don't know, is the New Testament. Yeah. I mean, that's the first pope of the Catholic Church is St. Peter. So this is an old story. And I don't know why we haven't been telling stories like that, because it's always been this rich, layered tapestry. But we haven't. And so I wanted to show that, warts and all. You are not sanctified because of what you say. You're sanctified by what you do. And the aliens, honestly, that's kind of a Catholic take. But that's how I feel. And I think that the aliens are no different. And so we have to depict that. And unfortunately, when you're dealing with something as powerful as an alien race, you know, like Independence Day is a great movie. You can see the parallels to Independence Day in my book, but it's so absurd. I mean, I think if there are aliens and they have galactic travel, you know, if a kid takes out his dad's spaceship for a joyride, he could conquer the Earth or depopulate it without much effort. I mean, this is the asymmetry of power between aliens capable of that sort of thing and humanity. So with that kind of power and the ability to sin, all sorts of terrible things can happen.
Yeah. Well, I really loved the aliens and your creation of the aliens, because I went in expecting it to be that, you know, they got to be perfect. If they're also Catholic, how could they be otherwise, was my question. But you answered that question quite well by showing their own creatureness. You could say, you can't say humanity because they're definitely not humans, but they're conscious beings, and because they're conscious beings, they have flaws, like huge flaws in their line of thinking. And you go into some dark territory with that, and this dark territory is very reflective of what's going on today.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of stuff that happens in the Middle East in the book, and I wrote that before what's going on now. And people are like, how did you know that was going to happen? It's like, I didn't really know it was going to happen.
Well, if you think about it, it's been kind of happening off and on for thousands of years, right?
It's a lot of turmoil in that part of the world. And frankly, there's a lot of turmoil in human history. I mean, the one thing, you know, going back to future predictions, in the year 4000 or 6000 AD, we're going to have war, and we're going to have killing, and it's going to be injustice, and it's probably going to be worse than it is now. I can probably bank that bet as well. I think you owe your audience your honest assessment. I mean, what people are buying a ticket to when they read my book is basically my imagination, my mind. And I wanted to be, I set the parameters. Aliens are coming. This is what they're like. Parameters that probably aren't even written in the book. And then I have to run that simulation, and I run it in front of all of you. And if you at all think that I'm faking it, I'm like getting an answer in my simulation, but choosing not to put that into my novel because, I don't know, it's impolitic, or I don't like the way certain thing looks. Readers detect that stuff so easily. And that's, I think, that's why a lot of like people are getting mad at some of the art that comes out now. They feel like they're being lied to by the creators. Like, really? You expect me to believe that? Like, I don't believe that. Like, what are you talking about? So I took it as an important thing that if Catholic aliens showed up, what do I think would happen? Not it must happen. There's other ways this could go, but let's just say that it doesn't go well. I think you have to, there's like a moment of, there's a exhale when you realize the alien ship wasn't come here to like eat all humans, and you're kind of going, oh, they just want to go to church. Like, that's what we were all worried about for 5 years. But if you think that, after, one day later, you start to realize, oh, this is just setting up a whole bunch of additional problems that we're all going to have to contend with. And that's all present in my book. And if I didn't show that, Jason, I think people would have thrown the book away. It's like, don't lie to me.
Yeah,
Or don't be so unimaginative as a writer that you can't foresee some of these conflicts that would essentially unfold. So I wanted to show warts and all, and I think that's you can only justify people reading your book if you're honest with them. So that's what I wanted
absolutely.
to put forward.
And I think it's kind of maybe even a responsibility on your part to do that kind of thing as a science fiction author, because you, as I mentioned before, there is science in this book, and consciousness is a form of just the study of consciousness and other consciousnesses. That's hard to say.
Yeah.
Consciousnesses that could exist. I'm sort of rambling here, but I'm fascinated with consciousness and alien consciousness and what consciousness is and all that. So the fact that you had the aliens act the way they did, despite what they believe, was just a fascinating aspect to me. And it alone kind of blew my mind. I was like, okay, I'm hooked. This book is awesome. And
Did I get you at the prologue? Because basically my prologue functions as kind of a window into a flash forward of a sense. So it's pretty bracing. That's usually my filter. If people can get through the prologue and still want to continue reading, I
yeah,
mean, I wanted to put my filter right at the very front so people
well,
could decide if this was for them.
I remember not knowing what to expect, right? As I mentioned, I kind of had like an unfair preconception of what this book was going to be. It's unfair to you, but it was there regardless. And I remember listening to that first little bit, the first couple of chapters, and I was just like, okay, there's something here, right? Like something really good here. And so I kept going, and I really enjoyed the experience.
I'm really glad you did. What was your favorite part in vague terms, Jason? What part really had you like, oh, okay.
There's a few. Well, first of all, Virgil, just him.
Yeah.
He was awesome. But also, one of my favorite parts was the reason why the aliens are Catholic, because you actually answer that question. And that was like the first time I had to sit back and I was like, okay, wow, that's really interesting. Uh, just imagine that were to actually happen. Like, how would that affect the world? And the ramifications of that revelation in the book itself has there's some really fascinating consequences, because the reasons that they have for believing in everything should, you would think, would just make everyone suddenly convert to
Mhm.
Catholicism, right? But that's not what happens. In fact, it creates a lot more tension and a lot more conflict than you would ever expect. Just rationalizing it.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad that was your reaction because that's how I feel too. That's my personal opinion. If the reasons that the aliens became Catholic were somehow replicated in our world now,
Mm-hmm.
um, like for example, the knowledge just is entered in a different pathway, I don't think it would go well. I say that as a Catholic. Like
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it would go well in society. Um, there's I don't want to give too much away, but that was part of the reason I wanted to write the book.
Mm-hmm.
And in other interviews, if people want to see other interviews where I do talk about spoilers, they can go check those out on my website. I have a list of all my
Oh, okay,
interviews.
yeah, there you go.
But
What, what's your
I
what's
think
your
you should
website
read the book
address?
first, and then go listen to those interviews. Buy a few copies. Buy copies for your whole street. Actually, that would be good.
That's always good, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's always good. I mean, who needs just one copy of a book? I mean, when you can have 100. But my website is mr. Am I going to get this wrong? mrleonardauthor.com. So
Okay,
it's like Mr. Leonard Author. MR. That's my
Mister.
name.
Yeah.
Everyone calls me
Mr. Leonard.
Mr. Leonard, which is correct, but it's actually my first two initials. mrleonardauthor.com.
Yeah. And so go there and check out those, because, like I said, I don't really want to go into that spoilery territory, because I think the people who listen to this podcast would benefit from learning it as they go, going in as blind as possible when it gets to the philosophical and even scientific reasons for everything that's going on. Um,
Yeah,
because
Jason,
if,
you think this will be popular with your audience? I mean, there's actually a huge overlap in the Venn diagram between horror fans and Catholic readers, believe it or not. So it's not completely. You. One person said that to me. He's like, "Well, isn't like those two different circles, the science fiction fan and Catholic people, and like there's probably barely any overlap. And I'm like, actually, there's a shocking amount of overlap. I think this is kind of a poorly understood thing about the publishing world is
Well,
that,
yeah.
yeah, a lot of people don't realize that these interests tend to intersect. There's all sorts of people out there that maybe you wouldn't know it, but one of the most famous Catholic podcasters, they call him the Joe Rogan of podcasting, Matt Fradd. He's a huge horror fan. I don't know
Oh,
that he
yeah?
reads a lot of in the genre, but he actually writes it with his sister, and
Interesting.
he publishes horror short stories. So
What's his name? I gotta check this out.
Matt Fradd.
Matt.
He doesn't do it on his main channel. I think he has a separate channel for that, but like, you know, just to show that the interests are there.
How do you spell his last name?
Fradd.
Okay. I had it almost right. I was missing
His
a D.
show's called Pints with Aquinas.
Okay. That sounds interesting. But yeah, you're right. You know, because of the culture and that we living in the Western world, there's a lot of people who listen to this show and watch the YouTube channel that come from this background, like Catholicism and whatnot. So there is an overlap, but and science fiction, because I know a lot of my audience read science fiction. It's just not something I usually cover on my channel, but I'm totally open, as is obvious here, to you know, spreading my wings and investigating new avenues. So I think
this is kind of, would you call this is not the hardest sci-fi. I mean, I tried to be there's some science stuff in there,
no,
but
it's
when
not.
aliens arrive on Earth, that's kind of mainstream. That's like
Yeah.
Independence Day, Arrival, The Day the Earth Stood Still. It's like we've seen the Martian showing up since the War of the Worlds, and it's just another example of that. It's just my take on it,
and it's not like I never. It's not hard science fiction at all. You're not going to get confused by the science that is in this book, but there is a little bit of science because there kind of has to be here and there, right?
Well, you got to have some, right?
Yeah,
I mean, you know,
absolutely.
to make it feel real. It's like salt. You got to put the right dose in.
Yeah, but it's definitely like the First Contact type story of science fiction, and yeah, I've read a fair amount of that. I really enjoy that genre.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Someone was talking about I don't know if it's the origin of it, but you know, you can imagine first contact between, you know, native peoples in the Western Hemisphere and Europeans. Like first contact is kind of a part of human existence. Like we're constantly encountering peoples across our history that we didn't know about or understand, and we have to figure that out. So I think that's why it can appeal sometimes larger than people who are just into like space operas or hard sci-fi that explore like a high level scientific concepts in a fiction universe. So First Contact is almost like a cheat. It's science fiction, but it's really more closer to general fiction. But that I will continue this story of Austin, because by the time the book ends, we're at like T plus 50, like 50 days post arrival. We're not, you know, that a lot happens in that time, and the aliens are still here at the end. So what happens to the world 10 years later, 50? And so that's kind of things I'm going to start exploring in the subsequent works.
So can you say that that's what you're working on right now?
Yeah, I'm working on the sequel to this book. It'll take place about 10 to 11 years after the events, and it'll be following Austin DeSantis, the protagonist.
Nice. That interests me too. Do you have any idea? Is there any projection of when that might be coming out?
Speaking of writing habits from the beginning, that's something I have to lock down a little bit better. I anticipate a trilogy, and I think I want to write books 2 and 3 simultaneously, or basically write them together so it coheres as a whole. So I'm really going to be writing like 2 books and then publishing them in order. So that could delay production, but no, not in 2025. I can tell you that. No. But if you go to my website, you can sign up for my newsletter, and that you'll be the first people to know if people sign up at mrleonardauthor.com.
Awesome. Science fiction is, it can be anyway, an idea-driven genre. Pilgrims, I think, is big on ideas, as we pretty well discussed here. Where can you tell us where you're taking this series? Are there any other big ideas that you're exploring without, of course, spoiling anything.
Well, it's probably the same idea, but just following the ramifications through a little bit further. I mean, it's earth shattering. What if there were aliens here that purport to have one religion? I mean, people are wondering what is all the conflict. When you purport to have one religion, it's generally at the exclusion of all the others.
Mm-hmm.
So I've always said, I don't know why my book was not written 70 years ago and why it's not a subgenre of books where it's, Muslim aliens come to Earth, Jewish aliens come to Earth, Buddhist aliens come to Earth, Hindu aliens. Like, why hasn't every, the Southern Methodists congregation comes to Earth? I don't know, all the different things. And there's it's been played out, and then, no one's even writing in that little subgenre because back in the 50s and 60s, they wrote all the works of this kind, and everyone's bored of it. It's not that interesting. I was shocked that I was one of the first to approach it. And it's kind of like a man in a high castle. It's that's Philip K. Dick's work where the Axis wins World War II. And, what does the world look like after that? Amazon turned that into a series for, I think, 4 seasons. So, if Catholic aliens show up, what does that mean for all the other world religions? What does that mean for world societies? What does that mean for America? I mean, we're not the most Catholic country. There's a lot of Catholics in the United States, but we're not the most Catholic country. Do we go down a few pegs? Does it matter how many Catholics you have in a country for power? What about all the other, people who don't believe? And are they kind of nonchalant about it? Are they upset? If you read my book, a lot of the events in this book have major impacts about how people say. So I think there's just more to tell, and that's the big idea that I think I want to explore more, Jason.
Excellent. Well, before we go, you already mentioned your website. Can you say what your website is again? I'll put it in the show notes for everyone to go and click on if they want. But can you say what your website's address is again, and where else they can find you online?
Yes. So my website is mrleonardauthor.com. Leonard is Leonard. You can find my website there. It has links to all my socials, including I'm probably most active on Twitter, although not super active, but I'm there at Monks on the Moon. I think there's a underscore between the and moon. And I believe that's my Instagram handle as well. So you can follow me in those places. You can sign up for my newsletter on my website. And in terms of the book itself, it should be at all retailers. I think it's published everywhere. It's not just on Amazon. Currently it's in the Kindle Unlimited. So if you have Kindle Unlimited, you can get it that way. And then there's the audiobook, which is what Jason experienced. And so for the audio production, I really wanted to do it at the next level. I had this theory that I see everyone walking around with AirPods in, whether it's the teenager walking from school to the cop directing traffic to the banker, cleaning ladies, everyone has AirPods in all the time, including myself. And so much is being consumed through audio that I just wanted to make the audio product top notch. So I actually teamed up with Jeff Hayes, who did a book called Dungeon Crawler Carl. He turned that into audio, and that's been a smashing success. That's a whole other saga of just extreme, just good fortune and well-deserved credit that's going in that direction. So the same guy who did this hit, Dungeon Crawler Carl, this hit series, did my book, and I think the audio product's great. And we actually put it online, so you could listen to my audiobook on YouTube if you'd like by going to Sound Booth Theater, their YouTube channel. They're called Sound Booth Theater, and you could listen to. There's an interview on the file when you click on it. There's an interview in the beginning, or you can just skip ahead to the book itself. And starting tomorrow, which will be June 9th, 2025, the whole thing will have been published online in 4 parts. So if you want to listen to the book and you don't want to send me money, that's fine. But I go live it. You have to, if you don't buy the book, you have to like it and share it. That's
Yeah,
the deal. But you can experience the audiobook if that's your flavor. And that's what Jason listened to. And I love to send people in that direction because I think they did such a good job that it's probably my favorite format of the book.
absolutely. I have to agree. I listen to a lot of audiobooks, um, and this one was definitely, the production of it is like top tier. It's one of the most entertaining audiobooks I've listened to. I'd put it up with like uh, Project Hail Mary.
Oh,
Uh,
that's great. That's
that
such a huge
Because that audiobook
love it.
was just absolutely beautiful, and this one is so close to that. It's like just as good. It's got a series, like, yeah, definitely go check it out because the audiobook is fantastic. You're not going to be sorry.
Yeah, and you don't have an excuse. It's on YouTube. So just, you're already on YouTube. You're listening to
Yeah,
this.
go listen
So
to
you
it.
can just click on a different thing after we're done and go right into the book. You
Yeah.
just have to like it and share it. That's the only thing I ask if you listen to it for free.
All right. Well, thank you, Michael, for coming on and talking about this book with me, and thank you for slinging some questions your way. And I hope to have you on again in the future.
Anytime, Jason. And thanks so much for taking a chance and reading my book and then having me on your show. I know it's not exactly in the middle of the bell curve of what you normally do, but I really enjoyed talking to you and I'm really thrilled you got to uh, participate in the book. And thank you very much. I really appreciate it.